I don't care who you are, Wall Street dude with the pinstripes and the pinky ring. You are here to be submissive. I personally have not found a way to fully explore the concept of life force without death being part of the conversation. What if imposter syndrome was a good thing? What if it was a litmus test of, am I actually getting edgy enough? It takes effort to override that negativity bias. Life force for me is also about being as interesting as I possibly can be.
Cool stuff there. Good morning, Mandy Lehto. Thank you so much for being a return guest today on the Ridiculously Human podcast.
I cannot wait to play with you. Thanks, Gareth, for asking me. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do this. Mandy, you're still like literally one of my favorite guests and also like most listened to podcasts. So, just an absolute honor. I was going through the notes actually from the last episode we do, because we do like I do like a lot of research on guests. And I was like, cool, let me just go back to kind of refresh the memory a little bit. And one thing stood out, which I kind of think is a nice way to kind of get this going. So this is from my notes, right? And I'm assuming, I can't remember exactly, but it's taken from something you must have written. Okay, so it's fast forward to 2019. You spend 7 months working on a book proposal on a book you've spent 6 years on, and you're not going to chicken out this time. You're 48 years old and still scared that people will point and laugh. But once and for all, you're more scared of not listening to the persistent inner voice of what wants to be created. So I guess the question is like, how did the book go? Did you eventually end up writing it, publishing it?
Wow, that's a great place to start. So you took me right back to 2019. I spent 18 months creating an amazing book proposal with a team of people. I got a big deal American agent. I was so fired up about this. I just had, a whole locomotive engine of energy going in a direction. And we started putting the proposal out in January, February 2020.
Mm.
Wah, wah. When publishing world completely shut down alongside the rest of the world, and everything just came to a grinding halt. And by the time we came out of COVID, the world had moved on. I had moved on. My agent had sort of got a bit wet cardboardy about the whole proposal thing because unless you were Michelle Obama or somebody of that ilk, they publishers just weren't taking any chances with an unknown. So I went into this profound grief. I parted ways with my agent at my request because I just couldn't bear, they want to buy cookbooks, they want to buy sourdough books, they want to buy Japanese cocktail making, like stuff people could do at home, right? COVID. But they weren't buying anything that was kind of air quotes risky. So I sat with that and I thought, do I self publish? Do I just put this on mothballs for a little while? And I went into a kind of dark night of the soul creatively. And what I realized was that this was never going to be born in this fashion. Whereas there was so much enthusiasm, and there was like, so and so can't wait to see your proposal, send it to this person, send it to that person. It felt like this was just happening, Gareth. And all of a sudden, it just fell off a cliff in that kind of Thelma and Louise moment, like suspended in air. And then nothing, nothing. And I think because I had spent so much time on that, that was like, 6, 7, 8 years of pre-work and direction and the proposal, and having spent tens of thousands of pounds hiring people to work with me to craft this proposal into a thing of beauty, and then nothing. And I went into this grief of, I suck, it's never going to happen for me. I just didn't know what to do with it. Like, of course, my instinct was to blame myself instead of thinking, like, okay, the whole world has stopped and nothing is happening. And I then did nothing for a long time. It just felt like it was almost too fresh, too raw to even look at it. And I thought grief is not linear. And I had to kind of come through that on the other side and realize that all that time wasn't wasted. It wasn't for nothing. I had so much anger around that. And under anger, once you burn off anger, it's kind of like when, when you put brandy in a frying pan and it blows off. Like under that, there's something else when it then simmers into a consomme. Like underneath anger is sadness and fear. And I had to sit in that for a long time. And I didn't want to sit in it. So I avoided it for a while. And then, we just kind of side eyed each other for a while. And I thought, okay, I've got to feel you. Come on over. Like I'll sit with you and I'll feel you. And it took a lot longer than I thought to work through the layers of sadness and fear and the possibility of it's never going to happen for me, the possibility of that, that was it. That was my shot. And of course, that's not true. But when you're in the suck of it in the moment, I think it's just acknowledging all of that stuff. And then I just took the pressure off of myself to have to whistle in the dark and, be the person who Pollyannas through and like, oh, well, I took this and I made it into this. And I thought, I don't have it in my energetic tank right now. I hadn't realized how tired I was. And then, with the cluster suck that was COVID, pile on all the things on top of that. So I just let it be. There's that old concept like sometimes the muddy water just has to settle and you can't force that. So I just let the muddy water settle and then had the clarity that it wasn't that book.
Mm.
And I went down, I'm not even kidding you, like 10 plus rabbit holes of maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's this. And then I thought, you know what? I still don't have the energy in the tank for this. So I started a podcast instead and I started exploring like, where is my energy going? Do I have any creative zhuzh left in me? Which I knew I did. I thought it's just how to defibrillate it. So I took the pressure off myself of doing a book by starting a new podcast. And somehow the creative energy of that felt different. It didn't have the heaviness and all of the emotional residue that the book did. So I could actually be lighter and playful there. And I thought at the beginning, nobody was listening anyway, like I had a couple hundred listeners at the beginning. So I thought I can pancake here. Like I can experiment, I can flap, I can try new things, I can pivot. So it really my creativity just got funneled in a different direction and allowed those green shoots to reemerge. And I kind of got my mojo and my confidence back. And I realized that a lot of the stuff that had been in the book was turning up in little vignettes in the podcast. It allowed me to relate to guests who had gone through a burnout or some kind of a big life situation. It just allowed me to relate and hold space for them differently. So something healing started to happen in pursuing almost like a side hustle to the book and playing and sort of just creatively flirting with that without the pressure that it had to be something. And lo and behold, I started to get my motivation back. And I thought, you know what? This podcast, like pieces of this podcast and conversations with guests actually need to be in this book. So I'm now creating a new proposal. I have got a new team of people supporting me. I'm in that place, a little older, a little, dented and bruised, and maybe a little wiser for it. And I'm holding it lightly. I'm not going at it with that locomotive energy of like, we are doing this, it's going to happen. I'm in the dance with creativity instead of like being in that place of I'm going to force this thing, it's going to be this way. So it's a different energy that I'm being with it right now. Is there still some residue of grief around that? Of course. Of course there is. And I think where I'm at right now, without doing some kind of like toxic positivity skip over, like, of course, it's a both end. There still is grief and sadness. And I realize that there's now a maturity in what I bring to this. There's more seasonedness. I mean, I've grown a much more substantial community on social media, for instance. I've got a big listenership with my podcast. So I feel differently placed to be in the creative dance right now. And it's scary and it's exciting and it's all the things.
It feels like it comes so naturally to you. I was listening to your podcast, and it like your podcast has been kind of, I don't know if you carried on from your last one, which I think was the Moxicast, and now it's the Enough podcast. I don't know if it was just a rebranding or you decided to start a whole new kind of show. But yeah, like hats off to you. Your show is extremely uh, well edited, well produced, which makes it like very listenable. And then you add the amazing content that you provide. And I was like listening to it, I was like, wow, Mandy should maybe write a book, because of all the stuff she talks about. Um, but yeah, I guess I was wondering like about the podcast you spoke about. Now you find your sort of creativity, but we spoke about a few of these things in the previous show. Was like, I was wondering, your podcast is like I says, at a very high standard. Is that the sort of perfectionist in you, the overachiever in you, or are you just like a naturally like sort of high quality producing person?
I think the latter, and there's always a risk of the former because I have had a tendency as part of my coping mechanisms of growing up through life to veer towards perfectionism as a way of seeking safety for myself, as a way of avoiding criticism, as a way of getting praise. But perfectionism, man, it is a tough taskmaster. So I think I've come to realize at 53 years of age that perfectionism ain't gonna get me where I want to go because there's something about when it tips. I had a guest who riffed on perfectionism with me, which is worth segueing a little bit into this. Catherine Morgan Schaffler, and we talked about her book is called The Perfectionist's Guide to Losing Control.
I like it.
And I know it's a great title. And you can't tell a perfectionist not to be a perfectionist. It's so dyed in the wool so that even the pursuit of trying to unpick the perfectionism gets perfectionism, like I will do this perfectly. I will lose my perfectionism with perfection. It's hilarious actually to see how one can try to do that, present company included. What she talks about is when perfectionism becomes maladaptive. It's almost like when a superpower tips over into being the thing that will take your knees out and recognizing what are some of the things that take you into that tipping point. So I have a high bar for excellence, which shows up in my podcast with everything else that I do. But honestly, I have a small team. It's not like I'm Diary of a CEO where I have 52 people exclusively employed on the podcast and unlimited amounts of money. I have a small team. So it's that constant dance between where can we hold up the adaptive side of perfectionism and aim for excellence and always be aiming for an ideal, but also giving myself compassion where, somebody's mic wasn't on the right setting and, they don't have the late night DJ velvety sound, but the conversation was good. Or, whatever may have happened in the course of that conversation. Maybe it wasn't as absolutely mind blowing as I would have expected. Or maybe that week it's really busy and I'm fighting a sore throat and there's just tons of pulls on my time. And it's finding like when is good enough, and taking the medicine of my own podcast, enough, the podcast, which is letting yourself off the hook of some of those ridiculously high standards and just figuring out like when is good enough. So I think it's a case of both end. I will always listen back when I'm doing the multiple edits on a podcast and think, ugh, that, there's too many ums. And, I will literally painstakingly go out and put timestamps for the ums and have my editor cut them out. Sometimes there's 52 of them, but I know it's going to create a good experience on the other side of it. So it's where am I choosing to sprinkle my perfectionism? That if I know the ums are going to be distracting in an episode, I will go through with a pair of little toenail clippers and clip every single one of them out to give a smoother listener experience. But sometimes if there's imperfections built in, like somebody blowing their nose because they're having a tender moment, I'll leave it in. So I think it's figuring out how to be with that perfectionism that's never going to go away, but me being the boss of it rather than the other way around.
I was listening to this really interesting podcast, Chris Williamson, he has the Modern Wisdom podcast, and he spoke to a lady that I guess I don't know exactly what she was a specialist at, but like I guess communication and talking and stuff was really the topic of that podcast. And one of the things that she specifically spoke about were filler words like and ah, you know what I mean? And she said that is, it's not necessarily because you are a bad speaker. It's because you're thinking in real time. Like, so that's your brain, like you're kind of giving your brain a little bit of time to process, okay, what is it that I'm wanting to say? And she's like a lot. So when you listen to sort of podcasts, sometimes it's actually good to, not, you don't have to keep all of them in, especially if you've got like a terrible person that says I'm all the time, but like sometimes it's actually really good to leave those in because it kind of drags your audience along because you can kind of feel them thinking in real time. But yeah, it was a really interesting podcast just about communication and filler words, and it made me less conscious, I guess, of mine because I know I say quite a lot. I say and a few other words as well. And yeah, I'm like, cool, I'm going to be less kind of like perfectionisty on that myself too, because I can also be like a perfectionist. But anyway, it's just really interesting. Like communication, I think, is a fascinating topic. Um, One of the things you also have spoken about on one of the podcasts that I was listening to was imposter syndrome, and just like how many of us actually suffer with it. It's like 70%. I'm sure it's more, I'm sure all of us like must suffer from it in some sort of way. But did you have like a really kind of cool way to describe it? Like there's three reasons, and then like how do you actually deal with it? I don't know if you mind just sort of running through those.
First, I want to start this bit of the conversation by saying something that I learned from Rich Litvin, who's one of my mentors. He's challenged the concept that imposter syndrome is a bad thing. What if imposter syndrome was a good thing? What if it was kind of a litmus test of, am I actually getting edgy enough? Am I putting myself out there enough? Because if your life is a comfortable slipper all the time, creatively speaking, because we're talking about a lot of creativity here or communication, or if my life is a comfortable slipper, am I actually going to an edge where, when you go to an edge in that kind of stretch zone versus the snap zone, the snap zone is not where we want to be, but in that kind of stretch place, of course, there's going to be some imposter syndrome because it's new. So if you start to think about when imposter syndrome might strike, there's a whole episode that I do on this. This concept, this particular concept isn't mine, but like when you're the first, when you're the only, or when something's new. This is when this can strike, which for me links back to what Rich Littman was talking about, that imposter syndrome isn't a bad thing. It's because you're doing something you haven't done before. And we feel activated in our bodies. We might feel that adrenaline coursing through our bodies. We might feel our heart rates going up, like your armpits might turn into Niagara Falls. You might kind of be like, oh, because there's something at stake that you care about, which, I think it's just a label that we've given it, but it can also be looked at in, I'm activated physically because there's something at stake and my body is giving me those neurochemicals and those, whatever physiology it can support me with to give it my all. One of my oldest friends, Carla, she's a soprano, like not as in Tony Soprano, but like a singer soprano. And she's been doing opera auditions for 25 years. She said she still gets nervous, and she said, when I don't get nervous, I don't perform well. So it's almost like your body is giving you that rush of whatever it is that you need right now, because it's like, you are on, girl, and you are going to go out there and you are going to blow them away. And I think if you're in comfortable slipper mode, maybe it's okay for, a conversation or a coaching call or whatever else. But I think if you're, and I'm like snapping my fingers here, like if you are on and it's showtime, it's that extra zhuzh. So I think it's also about how we think about imposter syndrome. Like if we feel that this is something that is making us less than, it's giving us a disadvantage. I mean, that's one way to think about it. But I love that reframe of what if you seek it out? What if you put yourselves in rooms where you feel a bit of imposter syndrome? Because that's how you're going to be, you're going to be elevated. You're going to be, something will be called from within you to show up in a new, sparky way. Will you flap, fail, pancake in those situations? Probably. But again, that's for me has become an indicator that I'm in a stretch zone. So I'm trying really hard to go against that narrative that imposter syndrome is something to be avoided, and really looking at it as, am I putting myself in situations and rooms where I get to feel that neurochemistry and that physical sensation of being on? And then I am that choice to put my ego to the side. And I know it depends on the situation, but I'm here to I'm here to stretch, I'm here to learn, I'm here to grow. And one little side note on that is so many people are paying less attention to us than we think they are. They're in their own stuff. If we're in a meeting and somebody's speaking, if their turn is coming, they're thinking about what they're going to say. They're not like forensically looking at the quality of what I'm saying. So there's something also freeing about that. We go even more meta. I just had a woman in my podcast called Julia Baird, an Australian broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, amazing woman, author. And she was saying that when people have gone into space in spaceships and they look at the earth and you can literally hide the earth behind your thumb, like when it's the size of a pea, it's such a perspective shift. So that when those people have gone into space, they've been physicists and mathematicians, and they come back, and she said they come back as poets and philosophers and creatives in a way, because all the stuff that we believed about our own egoic existence and our own self-importance and all that stuff, it just gets so reduced when you see how fragile we are in a way. So I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I want to mess with people's thinking on that.
Yeah, I love it. And I think nerves are great. Like you said, if you're nervous, it's a sign that you're actually doing something good, and you are definitely pushing yourself. And yeah, no, it definitely ties in with what I guess I think. But the one thing I want to focus on there for a second is uh Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He says that like you mustn't be scared of doing things and like putting your work out there. He's like, because nobody cares. Right? So he's like
True.
truly blunt about it. And he's like,
Yeah.
no, they don't actually care. So this thing that you like fretting about, you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to launch this new podcast or this book or like whatever it is, that he's like, no, just do it because nobody actually really cares. Um, because like you said, they're worrying about their own thing. They've got, I don't know, whatever it is going on in their life. They're having a huge fight with their wife. They're going through a divorce. I don't know, they're struggling with something else personally. And like, that's what's actually occupying their mind,
Mm.
not this kind of new podcast show that you want to launch, that you're so nervous about what are people going to say, etc. He's like, just go do it because you're probably not going to necessarily get much feedback, and that's in the beginning anyway. And it's so true, but it's also just sometimes difficult for us as humans to sort of conceptualize that. Like, of course, people must care.
Attention is so difficult to get. I think it's one of those things when you launch stuff and you have all of these emotions about it. Of course, it's human. Of course you do. But then you soon realize that you're living with crickets for quite a long time. And your auntie and your mom and whatever, they might be your biggest supporters. But that has been, launching stuff regularly into the world has been one of those big, big aha moments where you realize that Gary Vee is on the money with that. Like, no one cares, or very few people care. And even if you put out absolute crap, those people who are rooting for you, like your mom and your auntie, like they're going to root for you anyway. So they're not even a good litmus test necessarily, how good what you're making is. So I think there's also something about resilience is something I'm thinking about a lot. Bounce back ability, how to keep showing up when no one cares. That's also an art.
Yeah. Resilience is a really interesting one as well. Once again, it's so I sometimes find it weird when I say these things, like a person on my podcast. Like I'll be talking to people in conversation. I'm like, oh, this guy on my podcast. I try to avoid saying it, but it just happens. So I had this really interesting guy on my podcast, Bo Miles, and he spoke. He had a little girl at the time, and he's like, I don't want to teach my child happiness. He's like, happiness you can't teach. It's not a thing. He's like, I want to teach them resilience and hard work. And like resilience was the one that stood out. And like now you speak about it. And I think, yeah, I mean, resilience is like such a key factor to actually enjoying life. And you see a lot of people who are say like not happy and depressed and whatnot, and it's because they fold very easily, and they're almost afraid to deal with tough situations. And I wonder why that is, because I was actually speaking to a friend about it, of mine this morning about it. And when you are like a sort of optimistic, maybe say growth minded positive person, trying to understand people that are the opposite, like victim mindsets, everything's happening to me, the world is conspiring against me, and they're just like almost happy in their own misery. It's really difficult for us to understand that. Do you have any thoughts around that, like why people might be like that?
I think a lot of it has to do with this is probably our natural state to many, depending on how you look at it. I mean, I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist, but we all have a negativity bias, right? Like if you think about the purpose on the most banal scientific level of, we're not getting spiritual or creative here for a moment, but like the purpose of the brain is really to keep us having a pulse, to reproduce and to stay alive. Like it's pretty basic, right? When you start to think about it. And back in the day, if we go back to caveman days and teleport there for a moment, like life was short and brutal and everything was a threat. Like if you were sort of a creative, happy-go-lucky type, like, oh, I wonder what's rustling in those bushes over there, you're going to quickly become something's crunchy protein snack, right? So we are wired for negativity. And I'm talking purely, Gareth, from a sample study of one, because I haven't done any studies on this, but it takes effort to override that negativity bias. Like, think about how easy it is to catastrophize, how easy it is to assume the worst in a specific situation, just like the brain just ping pongs there. So the point is realizing, like, oh, yes, I'm now going to the absolute worst case scenario. That's what I mean, where the work comes in, of realizing my brain will naturally go there. And that's just an old anthropological thing. Like the software system has not been updated from, whatever, all those thousands and thousands of years ago. And maybe that's not a bad thing, because if you do hear footsteps behind you in a dark alley, you want to be activated in that way that you can run or freeze or kick or punch or bite or whatever needs to happen in that moment. But most of life, fortunately, depending where you are in the world, isn't that way anymore. So it's having the internal wherewithal and having done some work enough to realize, like, oh, my brain is an elaborate storyteller. And where there's a few data points in a situation, did my boss actually like side eye me and like give me a funny look after I said that thing in the meeting? And then the brain at 2 o'clock in the morning will fill in all the details with the worst possible case scenario, right? Which it could be that he just had something in his eye, right? Like, but we're filling all the data points in that way. So it's like understanding that, going, oh, there's me doing that thing again. Until that over time, human habit change is slow and painful. But once we can get to that place where it becomes the default not to be in that setting of catastrophizing negativity, we can also get stuck in drama triangles, right? And saving other people and feeling that our value is in fixing, or and then getting passive aggressive and going into persecutor mode. We can live there. And I don't think we can actually encourage anybody else who wants to stay stuck there. That's also tried that, been there, tried that. But I think there's a understanding, first of all, that this may be a tendency for many people because of the negativity bias. It takes work to create an alternative reality to live into. And it's an ongoing non-linear thing because depending what the situation is, I don't know about you, but my brain will still ping to catastrophizing or filling in the blanks with the worst case scenario. Halfway down the garden path, I'm like, oh, there's me doing the thing again. And then realizing it and course correcting. So that is where I'm at in my own personal evolution. I don't have that all figured out. Like, I'm not a guru in white robes on a mountainside who's got it all sussed. It's messy and it's back and forth and back and forth. Like, yeah, there's me doing the thing. How many times a day I do that? Oh, there's me holding it lightly, self-compassion. That's where I'm at.
This is very interesting because I think I would say I'm probably different, right? And this is a good thing too, of course. And I want to just sort of maybe break it down into a couple of things. So, um, uh, uh, okay, so maybe let me start with maybe it's like a masculine energy thing and a feminine energy thing. So I guess masculine energy is more, say, problem solving, and feminine energy is more thinking, should we say? And generally, like, men have more masculine energy than they have feminine energy, and women generally have more feminine energy than masculine energy. So maybe it's something like that. It depends on what your dominant energy is, to see if you are, you like a solution based person. You're looking, okay, he has a problem, let me try and sort it out, rather than sort of overthinking about it and stressing about it. Yeah, I don't know. Does that sort of, yeah.
I think we have both. I think
No,
we
yeah.
we have masculine energy, we have feminine energy. There's a place for both things. Like, in my experience, the feminine energy is a feeling
Mm.
energy. It's a embodied energy. It is a um, it's a chaotic, sensual, moving. It's kind of like swirls of smoke everywhere. There's something visceral, emotional, uncontained about it. It's a palpable energy. And I think for me, the masculine energy feels like a container for that. It's like the that's why these things can work so beautifully together. There's form to it. There's a logic to it. There's a action to it. There's movement in both. And I think there's a place for both things depending on what it is that we're doing through life. Like, I notice I tend to operate a lot in work mode from masculine energy. Historically, I had you armor up, you bulldoze your way through stuff, you make stuff happen, you have like a proclivity to action. And sometimes that's exactly the right tool. But I also found, like, being stuck in that energy, when you're a hammer, then everything has to be a nail, right? And there's some situations where it's better to be kind of a Swiss Army knife, where you have like different options depending on what's the situation in front of you. Sometimes the absolute right thing is to be in that feeling energy, to be in that movement, like, I don't want to be in that alpha masculine energy when I'm having a massage. I don't want it to be over with like, let's go, let's do it, let's do it. I want to like be in it. I want to be in my body. And there's something interesting that I'm rereading a book by a woman called Kasia Urbaniak, who's written a fascinating book. It's one of my top 10 books ever, and I dip into it occasionally. I have it on the teetering tower of books on my bedside table, and I've started looking at it again recently. She used to be a dominatrix in New York City, and then she also trained as a Taoist nun.
Wow.
And the concept that she learned by like being in these two different worlds is that power is where your attention goes. Wherever your attention is directed, that's where the power is. And it got me thinking a little bit about this masculine feminine thing, but also just an alternative language for this that I've been playing with. And let's see if this is relevant. But it's this dominant energy or the submissive energy. And the dominant energy is like, I am holding and driving this situation. There's a certain language that one uses. This is obviously her dominatrix training, that when somebody had come to the dungeon and you were going to be in charge. And I don't care who you are, Wall Street dude with the pinstripes and the pinky ring, like you are here to be submissive. And there's a certain energy and a language that goes around that. And that operates in the world outside of the dungeon. I mean, I've never been in a dominatrix dungeon, but I'm fascinated now to actually think about the power dynamic, that there's a lot of like speaking to a situation. There's a lot of like, there's an energy to it. And then being in the submissive, it doesn't necessarily mean that submissive is weak or weaker. It's just different. Submissive is the power in a dominant state is power out. In a submissive state, it's power in. I'm like in my experience. I'm in my body, which is what made me think of that. When I'm having a massage, I don't want chit chat. I fully want to be submissive to this experience. I want to surrender. I don't want to lead the conversation. I don't want to feel obligated to make small talk about the weather or some other BS. I want to be in my body, fully in the experience. So I think there's something too about playing with those states that might have different labels. Neither is better or more powerful, because there's a lot of power also in being willing to be submissive, to give yourself fully over to someone or something and just allow yourself to soak in that experience fully. Like whether you're looking at Californian redwoods or whether you're having the best sex of your life or whatever it is, like to be in that place is also very, very powerful. So I think that there's something about these states as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Just thinking about that. So, say if you are, I don't know, you're having a fight with your partner, right? A screaming match. By just being quiet, effect like you just say, let's say submissive, and listening to what they have to say, it can almost like control the conversation, maybe, because they are expecting you to come back at them, and you just if you just like rock back into your sort of heels and go, okay, I hear you. And then that's all you say, you kind of like in a way, you're just kind of letting them go at you, but then you've taken full control now. So I really like that state. It makes a lot of sense that there's power in both states. It's very cool.
Absolutely. And it's also understanding and having the wherewithal to get out of that activated state. It's kind of like communication or emotional aikido. If both people are pushing, like I'm pushing my palms together now for anybody who's not seeing video, but like really pushing, pushing, pushing the palms together, there's a lot of energy being expended right here, but nothing is moving. And I think understanding, like in one of those situations, to be willing to be submissive, that it just changes the dynamic completely. The situation moves forward. It might push someone over, but I think there is also understanding what is needed in this moment, and really being able to intuit that with a full bodiness, not just a head energy, but being able to tap into heart wisdom, gut wisdom, just being able to take a step back and slow down. What is needed in this moment?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess if more people can be less reactionary in like, especially those tough conversations and tough situations, then it generally means like a better outcome as well. So yeah, it's a powerful thing. Something that I really want to actually speak to you about, that ties in quite nicely with this, because it's two different behaviors by the same person, right? and it's come into my life recently just because of conversations that I've had with friends, and like often around, say, like their parents and stuff. So people that are like high functioning, right? Like, say, entrepreneurs, CEOs, sort of type of people, like they, they, and charismatic. Okay, let's add that to it. So they, people like in the business space, they'll really like look up to them, and you'll find them really sort of inspiring, and you kind of want to be like them and be around them. But then from a personal relationship point of view, say with their family, they're like closed off completely. They kind of mean, they don't give you anything. I don't know, because I know you deal a lot with sort of that kind of level of people. Is this something that you find that's common, where they have these different sort of people almost within themselves?
The thing that came to me as you were talking is a lot of the individuals that I've coached where that profile comes up may have been workaholics. They may have really found that they're deeply identified with their work persona. I do, therefore I am. And it's actually a thing that we can become addicted to work. Some people are wired to be worker bees. And I had this conversation with Dr. Anna Lemke, who's the best-selling author of Dopamine Nation, that we can be wired. Like we all are addictable once we meet our substance or behavior of choice. And I think for somebody who might be somebody who's a workaholic, for example, there's so much there's so much importance given to that role, so much energy given to that role, to cultivating this persona of I'm this charismatic CEO and I'm so identified with this. There's a couple of things that immediately come to mind from personal experience. And I'm not saying, again, these are small sample studies. So if just bear that in mind, is someone who's so over identified with that public persona that it's kind of like when they get home, they're scooped out. There's nothing left in the tank. It's like, I have performed all day. I have carried this persona all day. I have given everything. So at home, don't look at me, don't talk to me. Just let me sit there with my mouth slightly open, staring at a wall for an hour when I come home from work. But also then if that person is wired for workaholism and that's manifesting in their lives, also spending time away from work, like holidays or family time, can make that person potentially very prickly and not very nice to be around because they want to be checking their emails. They want to be continually doing. It's a struggle for that type of person to relax. So it's almost like that thing that is frazzling that individual is also the thing that they kind of can't live without. It's like this weird relationship that we've almost become addicted to this thing. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but that's something that I've definitely seen as somebody who's so identified and needs to like put out this front of this is who I am, that anything that challenges that, like an old friend that they've known since they were 10 years old, doesn't really much care that this is like flashy CEO dude, right? So it's almost like it's a different relationship with that person depending how invested that potential CEO is in that life and that persona.
No, it's very interesting, and it definitely like it definitely makes a lot of sense because I guess these people, that I'm thinking about now, definitely workaholics, for sure. So yeah, there's something there. But the one part I guess which I get confused about is like, how can you be, say, this workaholic who's almost craves attention because of that identity, but then when you say get the attention naturally from your family, from your kids or something, you lack the compassion. Like, it's just, I don't know, for me it's a challenge to almost understand that. And I guess human nature is complex. So I don't necessarily need to understand it, you know?
I think a lot of it has to do with, I do a lot of these kind of psychometric assessments when I work with somebody just to delve into these. I think it might also have something to do with, someone's tendency towards extroversion or introversion, or their tendencies towards, how much collaboration they need versus how much private time they need, how much recognition they need versus not needing recognition, how much power is a driver. A lot of it can also come back to values. And the other thing that I thought of, and we're not going to get any definitive answers here. I just want to say that we're just probing into possibilities. But the other thing is also that I'm really thinking about a lot right now for the new book is nervous system regulation, and how it's so easy when somebody is a workaholic, for instance, to not be able to move through the different states to be able to get back to the state that ideally we're meant to live in most of the time, the ventral vagal state, which is where we can handle a bit of stress and, but we're operating pretty well through most of the day. Like, we'll go up and down through these different states, but kind of getting stuck in either a state of hyper arousal, which is where we're in that fight, or like that fight or state where we can get our adrenaline jacked and just feel impatient and not very compassionate with ourselves or others necessarily. But it's just I found that definitely prior to my burnout, I was definitely stuck there. Like, you have to be productive, get out of my way, you're walking too slow, I'm finishing people's sentences, feeling like anger is right under the skin at all times. And I mean, sometimes we need to be in that hyper activated state to get stuff done. Like, sometimes we will have to clash with someone, and that is built into us. But ideally, we'll then come back down to that kind of ventral vagal state where we can, you imagine the antelope at the water hole again after it's been chased by the lion. It's not in that high energy state. It has to kind of come back and exhale. And then there's the hypo arousal state, which is where we can kind of numb out and check out, where you might be that state that I was talking, when you're sort of staring at the wall with your mouth slightly open after a super intense week, or you just scrolling but you're not really taking anything in, or just feeling listless, a bit meh, a bit flat. And as I said, we're supposed to, if you imagine it's kind of like a wave chart, move through those different states and be living in the middle ventral vagal state most of the time. But I think the trouble with anything to excess, whether it's work or something else, it can then trap us in one of those states when we don't give ourselves the proverbial antelope at the watering hole time to blow off the steam, to exercise, to meditate, to sleep properly, to nourish ourselves, to go and stare at trees, other things that, historically have put us into that chilled state. So I think it's really, really complicated. I'm by no means an expert on the nervous system stuff. I'm just a geek and nerding out on studying it. But I think that can also explain a lot of the emotional intensity and potential lack of compassion and connection, being stuck in that hyper arousal state where it's just like you feel like you're on jumper cables and you have to keep moving and everything feels intense and necessary and just like, no, no, I have to, I just have to. There's a intensity to it that is anything but compassionate and connective, including probably with that person's own self.
Wow. I think you literally just nailed it there. And because it's really like I'm thinking about, say, people I've sort of mentioned now, but that would just characterize them absolutely perfectly. So you sound like an expert to me on this. That's for sure. I look forward to the book. You've mentioned a few things that you've been like thinking about a lot lately, and one of them, I think, because you spoke about it, was death. You say you think about death quite a lot, and I actually think that death is, not like in this morbid way. You know what I mean? I think it's an important part to always have in the back of your mind, like we're all dying just at different speeds, and life is super short. But what I was wondering is, why do some people say, like you and myself, think about this? Like, why do we say think of death? Are there any characteristics that you've sort of picked up or thought about or know about?
I can only speak for myself again, but I'm really interested in the concept of life force. It's my word for the year. I'm one of those nerds that creates a word for the year. It was also my word of last year. So it's been so important to me. It's having another go around this year because I don't think I fully lived into it. I personally have not found a way to fully explore the concept of life force without death being part of the conversation. There is an awareness that all of this ends. And therefore, that brings certain things to my awareness that I'm deeply interested in. I'm not that interested in smashing goals or hustling or all of that. Like that used to be, I'd eat that stuff for breakfast in the past. And then I kind of went off goals. I was like, what's wrong with me? Like nothing's firing me up to make me want to get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning and like grab the day. And I just thought, is that it? Like, am I washed up? And then I had some conversations with my shaman friend, Teo, and a couple of others, and he laughed and he just thought this was hilarious. And I've really started exploring more of what life force means. What does it mean to, instead of like smashing goals and achievements, because there's always the next one. It's never really fully scratches the itch. It's just next, 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 next. And I just got a bit bored of that. So instead, I'm really thinking about being, not even making them into goals, but just for the sake of the conversation, like what would be some of my being goals? How am I choosing to be whilst I'm doing? And this is really front of mind because on Friday I took my kids to see Lenny Kravitz in concert here in London. And the guy is a legend. He's 60 years old. He is vibrant. He is life force. And I was thinking about that on the dog walk this morning. I was like, what is it about him? There's a humility. Like he's a religious person. There's a humility and a gratitude with which he walks through life. He's got his mother tattooed on his arm. Like he's always thinking about his mom, his, where he's come from. He thinks a lot about God. This is his flavor. But there's something about the humility and the knowing that it's not just about you. So there's that piece that I'm really interested in. Like, what's my version of that? So I'm really big into, I know it sounds like an old cliche and people might roll their eyes like, oh, the gratitude thing. But I try when I wake up in the morning before I get out of bed to just put my hand on my heart for a moment. And some days I forget to do this, but like, what am I really grateful for? I woke up today. I got to wake up today. Not everybody did. And just feeling like the beautiful bed that I'm lying in. And I get to have Greek yogurt with raspberries and granola and chia seeds that will stay stuck in my teeth during my dog walk. But hey, I got a great breakfast in. I get to have this day with my family. I get to create today. I get to help people to change their lives in coaching calls today. Whatever it is in my diary, like I get to. Am I always feeling like that? Hell no. But it's a practice that I try to come back to about being present and being grateful for the people and the situations that sustain the possibility that I have in this day. I also thought about like what else is it there going on there for Lenny Kravitz? Like he's in great shape. I think we've all seen that video of him on Instagram working out in leather pants. Talk about being true to brand. There's an honoring of the physicality of us. And that's something that I take very seriously, like really honoring that this body is the place that I live. I'm not my body, but I live in my body. And it's taking care of this and treating it with care and compassion and saying nice things to it. So I think there's that piece too. Then there's like this creative mastery piece of putting stuff out there, kind of harkening back to the Gary Vee stuff. Has everything he ever done been a smash hit? No. But there's something about like having the courage to go out there and do what it is that you want to do, create what you want to create, and just keep showing up again and again and again and again. And being so in love with the process and less about the outcome. Like showing up, there's something about the show up ability. There's something about that piece. And then the other piece, he's collaborated with some greats. He was so gracious how he introduced his band, and it it was about Lenny, but it was the collective around him. Like he referred to his band as his family, and he talked about how they create together and how he flirted with and played with the audience and told stories. So there's also that piece of how am I collaborating? How am I putting myself around other people who are also creative forces of life? So I'm currently exploring this, but there's also something about like the other piece I'll talk about here is just being present. When someone's in goal mode, it's always about the future. Like I have to get through this stuff today and grind it out to be able to get to the promised land of whatever it is and whoever I'm going to be, like this bright shiny future. And in my experience, change is slow and incremental. It never goes as fast as I would like it to be. And you put stuff out and it's crickets, or you get a little bit of unenthusiastic clapping from the back corner, and then you try again and you iterate and you collaborate and you have to love the process. It has to be fun. It has to be joyful. You need to be in it and see the good in what is happening moment by moment, because otherwise it's going to suck and you're going to be pushing boulders up hills in slippery flip-flops and get passive aggressive and cranky and all pinched up. So there's something about like I'm really reflecting on that whole experience of like what is it that I so enjoy about how Lenny is moving through the world. So that's a little LK wisdom there.
It's so funny. Like I love Lenny Kravitz. Every time when I was young, right? Like when I first left South Africa, um, the last song that I heard on the radio was Lenny Kravitz, I've Got to Get Away. And then every time I would, I don't know, like go somewhere, it seemed to be the last song I would ever hear. And I was
It's
like,
your anthem.
what's the world trying to tell me? What am I trying to get away from? But what I really like about that is that it feels like he realizes he's part of something greater than himself,
Yes.
which I really think is important. If you're religious, if you believe in, I don't know, some, karmic sort of yoga sort of, uh, you know, stuff, then both of those are awesome. Um, but I think if we can all realize that we are actually part of something much greater, then we'll think about like, okay, cool. What are my actions today? Am I actually contributing or collaborating, to this greater purpose for all of us? And then that tweaks maybe your decision making or what you're doing. But yeah, I definitely think it helps with sort of navigating I guess yeah, more life force sort of way of living, definitely.
I think it was Dacher Keltner who's written a book about awe. And when we think about what constitutes awesome moments in our lives, because I think that word it's almost lost its meaning because, it's such a staple of teenage vocabulary. Um, but when we think about awe, the studies that I'm pretty sure it was from his book, you would think that an awe-filled state would be something nature related, like Grand Canyon or something epic in that way, like laying down and staring at the stars or the northern lights or something like that. But actually, what he found was that it was witnessing acts of compassion, acts of kindness between people. And there's something about, for me, about putting oneself in the way of awe intentionally. There's a couple of friends of mine, my friend Susie Redding, my friend the writer Jen Pasteloff, like they go awe hunting and they make it part of their day-to-day activity. And I can't think of a more wonderful, joy-inspiring process to help us to remember to snap out of the tunnel that we sometimes put ourselves in, that is our to-do list or the whatever we're supposed to achieve on that day, where we kind of put blinkers on to what is happening around us. It's that ability to pull back. And there are ways we can all hunt, even if you're walking to the bus stop. There are, you see the little yellow flower growing through the crack in the pavement. Like, that was tough. What had to happen for that little seedling to find its way through until it poked through that tiny crack? And just noticing those sorts of things, but also coming back to what Dacher Kaltner was talking about was witnessing, even just witnessing, even if it's on YouTube, just witnessing acts of kindness, witnessing acts of compassion, witnessing acts of people helping one another. There's something redeeming and joyful. And I feel almost moved now talking about it. There's something where we get out of ourselves. And when we get out of ourselves, we create freedom for life force. We create freedom to understand we don't need to hold it all and think that in our puniness that we can influence things in any certain way. There's something about collectivity. There's something about compassion. There's something about marveling at something that is, for me, a massive, massive component of life force that gives us the freedom to create what we want to do, to put it out there, to know that we have the bounce back ability because nobody's really looking at us. So we're simultaneously these magnificent beings who are also kind of minuscule, and there's a freedom in that.
There's I don't forget who it is, but like lots of people say there's a lot of purpose in service. And in a way you can look at like the acts of kindness as like, you're helping somebody out here, and therefore you are finding that little bit of purpose, maybe just within yourself, or in your situation, what you said there, like you actually maybe are showing somebody else and they are seeing this awe like that you're doing. I don't know, you might just go help a granny, like push her trolley to the car or something like that. Um, but that ties in really nicely because you're an executive coach, right? And I'm assuming you probably find that you actually almost more of a life coach than say like a true executive coach, especially probably in your one-to-ones, right? Because I find myself personally like that's a lot of the time where things actually go. People just they need to understand themselves a bit better and therefore life a bit better. But what I want to ask you is like, do you find that say most people that you work with, and it could be different because I know you do a lot of corporate work still, but say maybe you focus on the people one-to-one, that the changes that they need to make to their life are often just little tweaks, or they sometimes just need like these little reminders about things. Because you just spoke about it now, like you can find like, I don't know, happiness in just observing other people doing good things. But I also, yeah, I do think that most people that are looking for change, it's often just small tweaks that they need to make. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. And working at an executive level, I always think that these conversations, no matter, what that person's title is still a person, right? I'm always interested in the person under the persona. I'm interested in who is this person under the title. And that informs a lot of our interactions. These are often people who are functioning at a very, very high level. They already have a high level of self awareness. And often we use winning strategies that are our superpowers, like whether it's somebody's charisma or whether it's somebody's IQ or, whatever it might have been, that these gifts and talents that have helped somebody to progress through life and through the career ladder. But depending where they want to go, sometimes those superpowers don't work anymore, or they're kind of not giving you the result that you want. And I think, again, if I can make it more tangible if I speak about myself in that way, is I had this winning strategy that I'm going to be the hardest worker. I'm going to put my back into it. I'm going to be whoever you need me to be. I will, you can count on me to do this perfectionistic type work. And that was a great winning strategy until it wasn't, until it took me down into a horrendous burnout that took me out for most of my 40s and that I've still never fully recovered from. I still take adrenal supplements twice a day. And I'm not sure if I can ever wean myself off of those things. So I think there's something about seeing, going again from this piece that we were talking about of the adaptive to the maladaptive, of that dance between those two things. Where are those tiny tweaks that could change somebody from like me pushing myself to burnout? Where could I tweak that I'm giving all that I can give in this moment, but also holding a little in reserve? Because giving all doesn't mean I scoop myself out. Giving all means what I have allocated for work. It doesn't mean that I'm going to, by giving everything, that I give up my family time, my exercise time, my sleep time, all of those things. So I think those tiny tweaks can often keep us in that keep us out of the maladaptive place. So I think there's an awareness that those superpowers that have got an executive where they are, it's not necessarily about learning a brand new skill. Sometimes it is, but not always. It's really about how do we take what you are brilliant at, what's, to use Gay Hendricks' term, like in your zone of genius, and get rid of some of the stuff that's in your zone of excellence. The zone of excellence is insidious because those are the things that deplete us. Those are the things where we become over responsible, over torque into giving away energy, time, everything that isn't ours. And if I can just focus on these core things and we identify those, and then you start delegating more of those things that maybe you were good at, but there are people who are in a different pay grade who would do an equally good job of those things. So I think some of it is identifying what's in your zone of genius. Some of it is identifying where you have a tendency to slide into old behaviors that no longer serve you and might deplete you and end up on that maladaptive side of your gifts and talents and superpowers. And then putting new practices into place to create a new normal based on the pulling those tiny little levers.
Mandy, I just to maybe end on something a little lighter, right? Like just listening to you now, like you are like obviously like an extremely well-read person. How how do you make time in your life these days to read?
Hmm. I think this is part of my creative makeup. Since I was a kid, I have been a total nerd. My favorite thing ever was going to the Scholastic Book Fair with a crisp $10 note. Like that was my idea of heaven. And looking through that little flyer of which books am I going to get? And I still feel like that. I love the ability to leave the world behind and to disappear into somebody else's head, into somebody else's words. For me, it is something that I know fills my cup. And I know my life is less rich without it. So if I am a commitment to cultivating life force, I know that my ideas are better when I intermingle them with other bright minds. I know that my podcast is better. I know that my parenting is better. I know that I am an all around better human when I'm noodling multiple complex, interesting things. Life force for me is also about being as interesting as I possibly can be. by being as interested as I can be. And I can't do that by myself. So it's something that I don't have time for. I choose to make time for it. Plus, it often helps that a lot of the people who come onto my podcast are authors. And I actually, in all fairness, I try to read their books fully when they come onto the show so that I feel already like I know something about them, not out of obligation, but because I want to. So it's partially a work thing for the podcast and partially a deep soul nourishment life force thing for me. So even if it means reading 10 pages before bed, before my eyes fall down, or if it means one of my latest favorite authors is a poet called Donna Ashworth. And she's written this beautiful book of poetry called Growing Brave. And sometimes, if I don't have time to read, I will literally just pull her book off the bookshelf and just open it at a random page and soak in a poem. And then I will like just let it roll through my body. What was nourished by this? Like what part of me was parched that needed this? So I think the power of words, the power of letting ourselves almost like be voyeurs in somebody else's brain and in their words and in their world. There may be people who are like, I don't know what you're talking about, Mandy, but this is a core component of who I be in the world.
Yeah, I feel that definitely. And just something off the back of that too, like you use amazing sort of adjectives in, well, the way you articulate, but also in the way you write. And it's almost, some of them are that it feels like it's yours, right? Like you've sat down and you've thought about a new term to describe things, like you bore out enoughness, cotton balls on eyes, like, and you've said tons in just speaking to you now on this podcast. Is this something that you consciously actually do?
It's something that I've been made aware of in my coaching community when somebody reflected that back to me and that said, you have a very interesting way of speaking. And I thought they meant my Canadian accent. It's like, what do you mean? And I didn't really realize it until somebody pointed it out to me and they said, what if you chose to be more aware of that? And I'm in that process of just like, huh, that's interesting that that's the word that chose to come out of my mouth. I'm obsessed with storytelling. I'm obsessed with helping an image to form in someone's mind. It's definitely a part of my coaching. I'm grateful that a few people have pointed that out. So it's interesting that you point that out too. So I'm aware of it, but also I'm trying not to over egg it because then I think it loses its authenticity. So it's more, I'm just aware that it's there and I think I allow it to happen more. I think in certain circumstances, I may have censored myself. I'm giving a talk to a group of women on Friday for International Women's Day. They're all serious bank ladies, and I've created this talk that I was going to do on boundaries, and then I thought, Mandy, that title is so dead boring. So this morning, right before our call, I rejigged the title and the talk. I'm calling it now the Boundary Banana. We're talking about boundaries, but it's the boundary banana, and bananas are going to feature through the talk. And there's part of me that thought, I can't do that. These are MDs. These are very serious people. And then I thought, you know what? They're people. These are women who do not want to sit there and be talked at. We are going to have fun. And I think there's this playfulness and this levity that wants to come through me. And words are a way of doing that for me.
And people remember, right? Like if you had just said to me boundaries, I'd be like, okay, cool, whatever. But now it's like boundary banana, like it just sticks because it's different. I love it. I'm like, I want to be more like Mandy. I want to think of these cool words.
Well, when you think about it, bananas are a great way. They're sort of like the lighthearted comic of the fruit bowl. They look a little weird, they're bright and sunny and cheery. And think about it, when it relates to boundaries, the banana is tough to get to, right? Like
Uh-huh.
it takes an effort. And, you have to find a way to get the thing open. Like some of my kids still say, "Can you open this banana? It's just not cooperative." So I think there's something about like protecting ourselves with that kind of protective skin and being a little bit hard to get to.
I was thinking about it when you said banana. I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking the shape of a banana. It's like, say, like a moon shape almost. Like, okay, the boundaries, sometimes you have to have the boundaries, I don't know, much closer, much further away, meaning like here they must be stronger, here they must be weaker. That's kind of like how I thought of it. So just as the second you said it. So, but there's so much there, you know. um, so, Manny, just to finish it off here, what are you kind of most excited about or have coming up that you think is worth mentioning, and where can people get a hold of you?
Well, I'll start with the last one first. I am most active on Instagram, so you can find me there just under my name. And I'm really excited about two things right now. I am so excited because I've just gone through a major podcast audit with a team. And the person who's led that audit has really encouraged me to up my game by really like bringing a bit more feist and a bit more fire and a bit more intensity to the podcast. So I'm experimenting with that right now of like, what would that look like to really go deeper into my art as an interviewer? So watch this space. I'm not sure what that looks like. So that of what is percolating on the pod, that's really exciting to me and mildly terrifying. That's definitely an impostery stretch edge zone for me right now. And the other thing I'm really excited about is I'm going to NASA next week
Wow.
to the Jet Propulsion Labs. And the nerd in me is, I can't even, I'm just bouncing around all over the place. So yeah, that's bringing me great joy of anticipating that.
That's cool. Do you get to put on like one of those outfits and go like get blown up? Is it that sort of thing, or is it something
I
completely
hope
different?
so. I hope so. I hope it's not just walking around with a lanyard on, but I don't know what I'll report back.
Oh, that's cool. And then just my last question: what does being ridiculously human mean to you?
I don't think there's any other way to be. I think there's something about the art, the beauty of being human is holding ourselves lightly with a bit of that banana energy, like not taking it so seriously. We become tighter and more brittle and less fun to be around. We hold back ourselves, our love, our art from other people when we take everything so damn seriously. So I think ridiculously human is the way forward. I don't see an alternative.
Mandy, I just wanted to say like a massive thanks. Honestly, like this is like one of again like one of my favorites. Just it is. There's something about obviously the way you speak, but the I don't know, your knowledge, like your wisdom, like it just comes out like in oodles and boodles, right? And I almost feel like, right, I've got to go and I've got to like sit down and re-listen to this and pick out like so many amazing things. You know, it's almost it's like this constant reminder just speaking to you about like, okay, cool, let me reflect on my own life. And so just thanks so much. Like you are like an amazing woman, and I know your book will be exceptional. Your podcast is exceptional, and just thanks again for your time.
It was so much fun to play with you. Thank you so much for being such a beautiful guide in this conversation. Thank you, Gareth.
Cheers, Mandy.